Batties, and welcome to another episode of Truth Behind the Tale, the series where I take a look at some of our most favourite fairy tales and delve into their historical and real-world origins. And today, as you can probably tell, we are covering The Little Mermaid. Of course, I had to do it in full makeup. If you guys are interested in how I did this, then please feel free to check out my 100th video, which has a time-lapse of me doing all of this makeup. Before we dive in, no pun intended, I just want to give a quick shout out to my amazing friend and super batty Rianne. This is her favourite fairy tale and she's asked me a few times to do it, so here we go, girl! The Little Mermaid was first published by Hans Christian Andersen in 1837, and unlike the Grimm brothers, who primarily recorded fairy tales, Hans Andersen wrote many of his own tales. Because of this, it sometimes makes it a little bit more difficult to trace their real-world origins, so with stories like The Little Mermaid, we need to take the potential sources with a slightly larger pinch of salt than normal. We can't even say that much about Hans Andersen taking cues from mermaids and sirens in real-world folklore, because none of that is really mentioned in his story. His mermaids are quite gentle and placid compared to the depiction of mermaids which is usually found in folklore, or at least European folklore. But one thing that does make an appearance is the importance of the voice. In Andersen's story, the Little Mermaid has a beautiful voice, which is said to be the most beautiful of all in her kingdom, a voice which, as we know, she exchanges to the sea witch for legs. In the folklore surrounding mermaids, there is usually this emphasis on the voice. They often sang to sailors, or told them that they were near land, but the sailors always knew that if the mermaid said this, they were doomed, because it would mean the opposite of what was actually going to happen. In a story from China published in the early 1800s, a man marries a mermaid and she remains his wife for the rest of his life, only returning to the sea after his death. And at first glance this wouldn't seem to have much in common with Andersen's story, except that the mermaid in the story is also mute. It's quite unlikely that he was aware of this when he was writing his version of The Little Mermaid, but it's an interesting side note nonetheless. And it also goes to show the importance of the voice, not only in Andersen's tale, but in other mermaid tales as well that came before him. Another factor which may have played a part is the idea of immortal souls. Besides marrying the prince in Andersen's story, the Little Mermaid's ambitions centre around her gaining an immortal soul, which mermaids don't naturally possess. Most tales centred around whether or not mermaids have an immortal soul usually say no. A legend from Ireland tells of Li Ban, who lost her family when they drowned in a lake, with her only surviving because she managed to find a pocket of air underneath the lake bed. While she was under there, she transformed into a half-human, half-salmon creature and lived for another 300 years. Eventually, after her beautiful singing voice caught human attention, she came ashore and agreed to be baptized, but immediately after the baptism she died and entered heaven, giving up another 300 years of her life for a Christian soul. This leads us on to the interesting note about the end of Andersen's story. In the fairy tale, the Little Mermaid is unable to win the prince's love, so she jumps into the sea, and according to the narrative up to this point, she would have turned into sea foam the moment that she hit the water, but instead she becomes a daughter of the air. In this form, it gives her the opportunity to gain an immortal soul for herself over the course of 300 years. Interesting similarities to Li Ban in that, but it's unconfirmed. Several scholars and folklorists aren't sure that this was actually the original ending, since it does kind of seem to come out of nowhere. Even P.L. Travers, author of the Mary Poppins books, had something to say on it.
The story descends into the Victorian moral tales written for children to scare them into good behaviour. A year taken off when a child behaves and a tear shed, and a day added whenever a child is naughty. Andersen, this is blackmail, and the children know it and say nothing. There's magnanimity for you.
While Andersen himself never confirmed or denied that there was another ending or that it was any different, he did write to a friend in 1837 explaining his reasoning behind the Daughters of the Air. He said,
I have not, like de la Montfouquet in Undine, allowed the mermaid's acquiring of an immortal soul to depend upon an alien creature, upon the love of a human being. I'm sure that's wrong. It would depend rather much on chance, wouldn't it? I won't accept that sort of thing in this world. I have permitted my mermaid to follow a more natural, more divine path.
We'll probably never know the complete origin for The Little Mermaid, and we'll probably never even know whether that ending was something that was added later or if it was the original. And it's probably safe to say that if it wasn't for Anderson's story in particular, mermaids would be nowhere near as popular today as they are. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Truth Behind the Tale. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please give it a big thumbs up if you did. And if there's any fairy tales that you would like me to cover, then please feel free to get in touch with me and I will do my best to dig into them and see what I can find.